So here we go again with stupid President Trump ruining the entire LA, California, just a criminal that needs to fucking go.
Covering what's been happening in LA in an ongoing story, the president is clearly trying to test the bounds of the law and going beyond over half a century of precedent, deploying these National Guard troops in LA with his stated reasons, including what they call ICE's authority and public security, but also with another agenda. We have these live pictures from LA. Trump did not collaborate or cooperate with the state governor, where there's usually exercised dual authority in the use of the National Guard. Instead, he invoked a statute, which he asserts, and this could be ultimately confirmed or denied in court, but his team says that gives them the ability to call these units into this type of federal service. That U.S. code, though, requires an invasion or rebellion or a situation where the president cannot faithfully execute the laws through regular forces. Now, Trump has said the protests are prohibiting ICE from doing what they need to do, their lawful duties, and that it thus meets the definition of a, quote, rebellion. Now, there just isn't a lot of case law to support that. So courts can decide anything. They also can sometimes duck cases that they don't want to take. But in the modern era, there is not good case law or precedent for that claim. The New York Times notes the statute itself does not confer authority to use federal troops in the way that Trump wants, and that no president has done this without the permission of state governors since the civil rights movement, the precedent we mentioned, which, again, cuts against Trump because there was literally years of lead up to that ultimate use without the governor, rather than what really exploded over the weekend with the Trump administration deciding to make a point here. Now, Trump also discussed and sometimes backed down on his musings or assertions to aides that he wanted to use the military more forcefully, including to break up protests. It's also something, a previous guest mentioned tonight, that he talked about on the campaign trail.
One of the other things I'll do, because, you know, you're supposed to not be involved in that. You just have to be asked by the governor or the mayor to come in. The next time, I'm not waiting.
That was March 2023. It was on his mind. We've all seen Donald Trump, the reality show star, the entertainer, and the claims and defenses around him that everything is a joke, or he doesn't know exactly what he's doing, or he just floats ideas. Here you actually see on the record the opposite. Reliable claims from senior leaders, including in military and law enforcement in the federal administration, last time saying he tried to do this stuff. Then you have him on the campaign trail musing about it. I'm not waiting. I'm going to do it without the governor. Also showing that he's aware of that general tradition, not that you can never take an exception, but the tradition, long-standing, that you don't do it without the governor, and this time he's not waiting. So California is trying to push back in the courts while dealing with the emergency. They are arguing that judges should rule against Trump on the idea that he basically infringed on the California legal role, or the federalism, the two types of power that we have in this country, something we've reported on in this very program. Governor Newsom says, in his view, the whole thing is federal illegal powers by Trump.
It specifically notes, and under what the DOD did, is they had to coordinate with the governor of the state. They never coordinate with the governor of the state. There's a protocol, there's a process. He didn't care about that. It's Orwellian, simply lying to people. Unconstitutional, illegal act, his mess, we're trying to clean it up.
Now, that is the governor's view. Some of this comes down to truth. In other words, was there coordination? Did that truly happen or not? The governor says no. Trump and his aides have suggested otherwise. The governor said he's a, quote, stone-cold liar. Trump has been caught making many falsehoods, but we're going to need a little more evidence and reporting, which may come up in court, about whether the governor is right. If he is, that could cut against Trump in court. And remember, National Guard is this quasi thing. It's this hybrid state-federal thing. But if a judge or a senior federal court says you don't follow this order, or this order is unlawful from the president, well, then that's the end of that until and unless the Supreme Court intervenes. So we might learn more about this in short order. Meanwhile, Trump wants the Pentagon to dispatch personnel potentially anywhere for these laws. we mentioned this earlier in the broadcast. This is very important because some experts see that as a chilling sign that this is not a one-off in California this weekend, but a test case where Trump is, quote, prepared to send troops into other cities in response to protests. Now, take it all together and keep in mind that while there were incidents of violence, and there certainly have been physical clashes over deportation and ICE authorities, we've been all seeing that and covering that, what we are talking about at its core is the first right that's in the Constitution, and not one that's very confused or debatable. The very First Amendment, the right to speech and the right to peacefully assemble. And there is no precedent in the modern era that has ever held up that you can go and take people's peaceful speech and protests and send in the troops. If that's what they have in mind on a repeat basis, well, they have in mind a very different country. We're joined by a former federal prosecutor, Ankush Corduri, who knows these issues well, and now writes about them for Politico. Welcome. And point blank, how extreme are these measures that the president has chosen to take over the weekend? And what is the likelihood that they may be unlawful?
I think they're quite extreme, very disproportionate, and pretextual, I think, at least given the stated rationale. The terms of the likelihood of a successful court challenge, that's really unclear to me. As you've noted, there's not a lot of precedent, at least in our lifetimes, for a situation like this. It's not like there's a clear roadmap for a court to pick up a case like this and figure out what the standard should be, what kind of evidence should be admitted, what is the relevant information that should be adduced. Courts generally, I think, try to avoid weighing in on issues like this on the theory that the executive branch is more competent to deal with these sorts of military issues than they are. And then, of course, you have a broader issue, which is, could a court even intervene quickly enough to issue some sort of order that would put a halt to this, or will it all kind of blow over, ideally, blow over quickly and before a court needs to step in? So, there are a lot of issues hanging around here. I think, though, to me, the sort of clearest and most dispositive issue is that there is not a rebellion in Los Angeles. That's the statutory predicate for the administration's actions. There are other arguments that California has raised, but to me, that's the critical one. There's not a rebellion. There just simply isn't. There are a bunch of protests. There's some sporadic violence, which is illegal, and we should police appropriately, but that's not the same thing as a rebellion.
Yeah, there's no rebellion, and there isn't even the scale of protests that gets into mass safety issues, which, while not a rebellion, raise harder questions, which America has seen. We've had mass protests, sometimes in more than one city. We've had marches on Washington. We've had gatherings that go for days in some places at a higher scale than this. And then you have tougher questions of law enforcement that still don't reach the level of saying it's a rebellion. I do want to draw your attention and viewers to the legal setbacks that the administration has faced, because they've dialed this up over the weekend, right after yielding to a Supreme Court ruling formally on Friday, in a process that took some time, but where the administration returned 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐿 Garcia, who had been mistakenly deported to the wrong country. That wasn't even in dispute. The question was whether they would follow the Supreme Court order to facilitate his return. And so then over this weekend, having yielded in one place where they comply with a court order, and that is the actual legal outcome of what had been quite a serious matter that went all the way up to the Supreme Court with a 7-2 loss, they turn around and on the weekend have something where they can look like, and in some sense be, on, quote, offense or pushing other powers. As a student of how this all works, who's also been inside, the executive branch yourself in a certain way, do you think there's a link here? And do you think that that's part of the problem of the endless theatrics of the Trump administration? They didn't want much time or attention on what ultimately turned out to be them yielding to the high court.
Yeah, I think that you've touched on two very important issues, I think. One is that this sort of legal strategy is consistent with a strategy we've seen repeatedly since the start of this administration, with concerns invoking these emergency powers, these obscure laws, in order to deal with problems that are not emergencies, right? We saw this when they invoked trade deficits as an emergency for the tariff framework. That was rejected recently by the Court of International Trade, but that's up on appeal. in the case of 𝐾𝐨 and a bunch of the other deportations, there's been this claim that the Alien Enemies Act should be invoked, or has properly been invoked, because we're somehow at war with or engaged in hostilities with Venezuela or Nicaragua, which is simply not true. This is a very problematic trend for a democracy, having emergency powers laws being invoked so regularly and almost becoming the norm. The second thing I would say concerning sort of the politics around this is that there is plenty of reason for Trump to want to draw attention away from what is going on in the rest of his administration. He promised the economy would improve quickly after he came into office. That has not happened. He promised he would end 2 different wars quickly after he came into office. That has not happened. He promised that his tariffs would bring along an economic resurgence. That has not happened, and the 90 deals in 90 days have not remotely emerged. The bill, that his big, beautiful bill that's moving through Congress, is on the bubble now because the Senate, it's not clear that he'll be able to keep all the Republicans in line in the Senate. We shall see. So he has faced a number of challenges on many of his core political promises. This is the one, immigration, where he's gotten some traction, and he's chosen now to escalate this in an area where there's very little for the other branches to do, at least quickly, in the way of putting in some sort of brakes on the process.